Well, I think it depends what you mean by progressive, because everybody's got different views of progressive. But in terms of, if by progressive you mean reform, I think there's been, some progress in some areas, but not in others. I think in economic policy, for example, we've gone backwards quite significantly. The NBN is a good example of that, where after several generations of economic reform, where telecommunications ceased to be a state-owned monopoly. Well, first it ceased to be a state-owned monopoly, but remained state-owned. Competition was allowed. Then it became privatised, so you had a normal competitive, market for services. Then we've now gone back to a state-owned telecommunications monopoly, which is going right back several generations. So that's one very poor example. Obviously, when people talk progressive politics, they're often talking about social issues, and there's naturally a lot of attention given to the whole debate about same-sex marriage. I think we've seen a lot of progress in terms of equal rights for and in terms of entitlements for same-sex couples, and generally speaking, same-sex couples now have the same rights, and from a tax point of view or a superannuation point of view, medical benefits point of view, as to heterosexual couples. But of course they can't have their relationships described as a marriage. That remains the last issue, I guess. I think that the debate, obviously, the vote last year was disappointing for the advocates of gay marriage, but I think the issue will return in the future because public opinion is moving so quickly. Sometimes Parliament's ahead of public opinion, sometimes, more often, it's somewhat behind. Look, I think there's always a concern about that. I actually think we're moving away from that. Not so much in the Liberal Party, because we've been out of government for 2 terms, and we have had a very extensive consultation process on policy in the time we've been in opposition. So everyone's had the opportunity to make inputs into policy. I think that the very presidential style of government that was practiced by Kevin Rudd in particular, and also Julia Gillard, where decisions are taken just within a very small circle and even the whole cabinet isn't engaged, I think that has proved to be a failure. The federal government is just too complex to be able to be run out of the Prime Minister's office. Even if you wanted to, even if you thought that was the right thing to do, and it's clearly not. It just doesn't work. I mean, a lot of the problems the Labor government's had have come from that. So we're very committed on our side to return to a traditional cabinet style of government, Westminster style of government, and that is where decisions are taken in a much more consultative way. Of course, one of the things that drives this is actually, I'm not blaming the media, of course, but one of the things that does drive it is the pressure of that 24-hour or perhaps 60-second news cycle, where there's pressure to come up with an instant response, an instant answer. And I think politicians, all of us, need to have the fortitude when a big issue arises to be able to say, look, this is a big challenge, but we're going to get some advice and have a meeting and discuss it. I think the public would welcome that. I think they'd like to see us making decisions in a more considered way. Well, I don't think so. I honestly don't think that's right. I think when people look at Tony Abbott and say, well, he's from the conservative wing of the Liberal Party, therefore the moderates don't have any influence. If you look at the Shadow Treasurer, Joe Hockey, is a leading moderate. Christopher Pyne is a leading moderate. I'm described as a leading moderate by some people. I'm not whether I'm entitled to that description or not. It's for others to judge. I don't think I think it's a pretty good balance. Well, I think the Greens have obviously, had a lot of influence in this Parliament because they are in effect in coalition government with the Labor Party. for all intents and purposes, Labor needs their numbers to get their program through and for the government to be there. So they've had a lot of influence. Yes, I think in some respects that is probably true. The Greens have been able to run hard on some conviction issues which Labor has seen to have abandoned. And, you know, they've created a lot of problems for the Labor Party, certainly, but not for, you see, when you talk about progressive politics, it's a, you know, there are a lot of terms in politics that are difficult to define. Progressive is a very, very slippery concept. Everybody says their policies are progressive. There's no, so the real question, the test I would have for what is progressive is, is it making us a fairer, more prosperous society, a society where people can realise their dreams more readily, where there is more equality of opportunity, doesn't. The Greens policies would not lead you down that track. If you let the Greens put the Greens in charge of economic management, there'd be less opportunity for everybody, and that's that's part of the problem. So if progressive does not equal left,
yep.
Okay, not in my view anyway. Well, I think the critical thing is not to confuse prejudice with principle. A lot of people have got political prejudices and deeply held opinions, often very grumpy ones, and imagine that they are principles. And they're not, by and large. You've got to be very focused on what are the principles, the political principles that you're focused on. Now, mine, I always like to say that the Liberal Party, when it is at its best, takes the view and acts to make this view reality, that government's job is not to tell you what is best, but to enable you to do your best. In other words, to enable the individual to do so. Now, that's not, that doesn't contradict the idea of social justice or a social welfare safety net, because clearly you can't do your best if you don't have opportunity to education and health and all of those things. So it's, but it is very much focused on the individual making their own choices. And I think that is, the attraction of that is that it's consistent with human nature. If you just look at the digital world for a second, for the digital realm, every application, every new stage of technology is the successful players, the successful applications are those that offer people the most choice. Whether it was, the end of AOL, the end of the walled gardens concept, the end of portals, people want choice. That is so natural. And so choice, freedom, those are the things which we should sought to enhance within, the context of a just society.